Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing in a minute. I just want to say hi to everyone. Good morning. My name's John Miner. Let's hide the camera. Maybe it'll help with the um, video that we're having problems. Okay, and can I share my screen? Let's see, full screen. Chat. Was I given the ability to share? I don't see it here. Or oh, awesome. Thank you. Okay, cool. So I'll get into the presentation. This is an older slide deck from SQL Server that's been around forever. I started this presentation about 10 years ago. I'm going to get a little about myself. I live in Rhode Island, so just to give you a little idea where I am, I'm in this little dot here, and you guys are way, or folks, should I say? That way I'm not being gender specific, in Bangladesh over here. So thank you again for inviting me to talk tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm going to give you a couple links. First one is I'm going to be talking about how to audit and prevent unwanted server changes. But there's a great article I wrote for MS SQL Tips. You might want to, take this URL down. It's right here. I will copy this. And if we don't get time to go through everything, where's the chat in here? Here's the chat. I'm going to throw this here. So that is a whole article you can read. It goes over a what I say example of HIPAA. Okay, and we're going to talk about how to audit different things like selects, who did a select or who did an insert, who did a delete, and who did an update. So that's one place to go. And last but not least, this is where we are. So I'm going to close this. And last but not least, I want to show you my GitHub. GitHub, and then Jhon Miner. And if you're curious, there's a ton of presentations here, but the one we're going to talk about today is Audit and Prevent Unwanted Server Actions, okay? So this has the whole deck and all the code that I am going to go over, okay? So with that said, let's get into the deck. So I'm going to maximize this. I'm going to pause, say every 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll say, hey, if there's any questions. And then at that point, if you want to speak up, I'll answer them. So this is SQL Saturday Bangladesh, and thank you again for having me. I go by the Crafty DBA, and that's before everything became data platform. I still do a lot of ANSI SQL stuff, but nowadays, most of the stuff I'm doing is big data, right? So I just heard a noise. So did anyone ping me? Let me just make sure. And if the moderator, if you see anything, just give me a holla, okay? Let's maximize this again. Yeah, so I do a lot of big data nowadays. Data warehouses like Snowflake, as well as, what was the other thing I was going to say? Data bricks, anything Spark, so Spark SQL. But this is kind of like my bread and butter SQL Server. So again, this is my little Twitter handle. I'm the Crafty DBA because I like doing crafts. So I build stuff like barns and things like that. Built my shit out back, stuff around the house, as well as crafting beer. Here's a couple blogs to show you the MS SQL tips. There's an old one called Crafty DBA. Yeah, I'm Microsoft certified as well as MVP. And I know we're not going to have much time, so I got a lot of stuff to go through, so let's get to it. So the target audience, there's two types of people, right? There's developers and administrators, right? So developers, we want to talk about how to use table, database, and server triggers, okay? That's one way in which you can go ahead and capture this information when something happens with your system, okay? The second thing is if you're an administrator, you want to know all the coding tricks of the developers, but you also, the first place to start, okay, is granting the correct privileges, okay? Because if you're trying to have someone prevent them from trunking a table, well, don't give them the ability to do anything other than data read it, right? So we're also going to talk about an alternative way to do it, which is change data capture. One thing I don't like about change data capture, I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert ahead of time, is if you're collecting audit records, say, and then guess what, you stop the capture, and you delete it, guess what? All those audit records go away. If you do triggers, guess what? You disable the trigger. Guess what? The records are there. You enable it. Not a problem. Typical corporations, okay? A small, many companies are many small divisions, and like we see tonight, right? I'm on the opposite side of the planet from you, but they're located in different time zones, right? So other people have the ability to do things. How can you put a process in that will prevent an unwanted audit unwanted actions? Like if someone went ahead and deleted all the rows from a recipe table. Okay, I worked for automotive company at one time. They made parts for automotives, specifically sensors, and that table told the machine how to make the sensor. And if someone made a mistake and put the wrong data in, guess what? Now suddenly it got programmed wrong and you got a bunch of bad parts. So how do you go back and figure out who did that, right? And so that's what the whole thing about today's talk is. First, A, don't let them do actions that you don't want them to do. And B, if they are given the keys to do it and they still make a mistake, who can you find out that did it and go back to them and say, hey, please don't do it again, okay? So we're going to talk about the following techniques. Granting the correct user access is vital. So again, least privilege is best, okay? We're going to talk about DML. What does DML stand for? So that's data manipulation language triggers, okay? And those will go on tables. Then there's DDL. What is DDL? That's data definition language, okay? And those will be like on tables and servers, okay? And we can talk about preventing unwanted data modifications. We can also talk about preventing unwanted schema changes. Guess what? A lot of times you say, well, I can roll back a delete, but guess what? Truncate's really not a delete. It's not logged, right? So how do you prevent truncations? We can also do login triggers, and you got to be really careful with login triggers, okay? If you go ahead and you say, Jhon can't log into his server after 12 o'clock because he's working too late, right? Then guess what? He won't be able to log in. And if I mess up on a trigger and I say, just don't log in, suddenly your SQL servers won't log you in. And if you don't have a backdoor, pretty much you're locked out. So just be really careful with logon triggers. And last but not least, we're going to talk about change data capture. With anything, we need some type of example database to work with. This chart was done with Oracle. Oracle has a free tool out there, SQL Developer, I think it is, and you can just draw ERD diagrams. So it's a very simple ERD diagram. We have cars by country. We have a bunch of continents that match the cars. And we're going to do a couple things. We're going to actually create a table for login database changes, table changes, see how that works. Going to create a table for log database changes. Okay. We're also going to have a key table to prevent, okay, a foreign key. And we'll talk about how foreign keys can prevent certain actions. And last but not least, we have another table here, which is active prevent continent changes. And I don't remember why that is, but we'll probably figure that out once we get into the demo. Warning, there is going to be a bunch of code here. So it's mostly code. Okay. If you're not interested in code, then if you want to take a snooze and come back, that's fine. I won't be offended. But interesting thing is there's a guy out there called Scott Adams, and he's controversial. Some people say that, he pokes fun at people and they might not like that. But one of the things that he did about 20 years ago is he basically did this article, and it's like the manager comes to the the engineer and says, hey, I want to build a database. Which one should I do? And he's like, well, would he read this in the trade mac? And of course, he says, hey, what color you want, right? And he says mauve. And the interesting thing is that if he said Azure here, which is a color, right, he would have been spot on right for Microsoft, okay? But very interesting stuff. So let's start from ground zero. We're going to create a database called autos, and I'm going to show you how to do that in code. We're going to make active and audit schemes. Scheme is a really great way to secure objects into different containers, and then you can put security on, okay? We're going to create the continent and cars by tables, and we're going to design two store procedures, okay? Just a simple way to load some data. The reason why I did this is because I'm going to want to call them multiple times. I just don't want to go find the insert into. I just want to execute a store procedure, okay? And we'll load the code. So let's get into the demo piece. If anyone has any questions, just holler. Okay, so I have this VM.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Jhon, till now it's okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. And if there is, just like I said, I'll every 5 minutes say, hey, if there's any questions on this, please tell me. Thank you. So in this one, we can see that I did this back in 2013, a long time ago. I did this, but we have a bunch of databases here. We got the autos, right? So we're just going to drop this, okay? And we can hit delete. And I'm going to say close existing connections just in case there's something there. Okay. So this is what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about schemas, table triggers, database triggers, table triggers for preventing data changes, database triggers for preventing schema changes. Okay. We're going to view the check option for prevent on views to prevent data changes. We're going to talk about foreign key relationships to prevent table truncation. Talk about audit logs for logins for review. So we want failed logins, successful, so on. How do you log in trigger for time constraint? So, hey, don't bog my servers, right? Between 12 at night and 4 in the morning, you can't log on unless you're a system admin. You can set that constraint up, and if anything expires, you won't be able to log on. We could also talk about an application. I apologize, my company is getting more strict on security. I used to be able to install stuff, and also the MVP used to have access to like the Office products. I had my example was access. I'll show you what it looks like. You're just going to have to test it in your own environment because I'm locked down. And last but not least, we're going to talk about change data capture. Okay. So when we want to create a new database, we want to go to master. And again, some of this might be really boring to you if you're a database administrator or developer, but I'm just going to go over the basics just in case it's brand new to you. Okay. The new syntax is drop database if exist. Okay, that came out 2016, 17, or 19. You have to look at the docs. I forget which one. This is the old way. You can do select star from like a system table and say, hey, if it exists, then drop it, right? So if I run this, it's not going to really do anything because the database is not there, right? Next thing is we need a place to put it. So I'm just going to put it here. We get a size of 32 megabytes, very small, unlimited growth. Max size and some growth. Okay, so this is a teeny database. We're doing this little toy database. Okay, I wouldn't be doing this in production. So once we create the database, and we need to do a refresh, right? Because it doesn't happen to show up here right away. So here's your refresh. Next thing is going to go in autos, and we're going to execute this to use that. Now we switch to database. Great. Now we want to create two schemas. Now the schemas, okay, are actually part of security. So if we go in schemas, we can see there's no schema here, right? Now I'm going to create this one here called audit, and I'm going to give DBO access to it, and I'm going to create a schema called active, and same thing. Okay, so we run this, and again, we have to hit a refresh, and now we can see that our two schemas or containers here. Okay, so now we can build objects here like tables, index, or so on. Okay. So we're going to use autos again. Don't need to do that because they're there. And we're going to say, hey, if the table doesn't exist, then create it. So we're going to create a table called continent. And if we go to tables, we can see active.continent. Now we want to add some things, right? First we want to do is we want to add a primary key. Execute. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a user stored procedure, load continent. Okay, so drop the procedure, and if not, basically what I did is I got some Wikipedia data, and I'm going to execute it and select from it. And if we see it, we can see we have 7 continents. So Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, South America, Oceania. What is that? And Antarctica. Well, you can find out if you're curious. Look it up. So you can also have a cars by country table. So we're going to do that one. So a little more data than the other one because it had only 2, ID and a name, right? This one will have a country name. Is it a personal vehicle, number, commercial vehicles, total vehicles? Did people are buying more vehicles, and maybe a percent change, and associated continent, which it's added to. So again, we're going to add a primary key. We're going to do a foreign key. Okay, so alt the table, add constraint, foreign key from the continent to the actual cars by country. Okay, so we'll load this again, and we execute. Okay. And now if we hit here, we hit refresh, we can see it. So we go here and we look at constraints, our keys, and we see there's a primary key, there's a foreign key, right? And we can see this one has keys. We have a primary key. Now we haven't loaded any data, so we're going to create a store procedure, okay, to load the data. Okay, so I'm going to roll them down here. Interesting thing is, I didn't point this out, but I'll put it here. There's many different ways you can do start procedure. Like you can create start procedure, and you can tell it how to execute. Like I can execute as SA or execute as another thing. I'm going to execute as call, which means execute as myself. Set no comp means that we don't want to show any output. And then basically I'm going to do a bunch of record inserts, right? Now the interesting thing I'll go here is this syntax came out before in the past, say like when I first started SQL 2000, right? You could do insert into, and that's it. And then you have to do row after row. There's a new syntax called values, which allows you to put tuples. So you can put one row, comma, next row, which just makes it nice, right? I don't have to go ahead and do, if there's like 39 rows, I don't have to do it. I'm going to execute it and I'm going to see the data, okay? So right now I'm just building the table to actually go ahead and get ready to do the demo, okay, that we're going to be talking about. So now we have two tables, and I'm going to get out of here if I can, minimize, and go back here. Okay, so we started from ground zero. Let's talk about granting access, okay? There's many different ways to do this, okay? And what you want to do is the principle of least security. Never give out more than needed, okay? So you don't want to give like, the secretary who's the lowest person in the company system admin rights, because you never know, you might drop the database, right? However, give them the rights that they need to do their job, okay? So principals are objects that have access to resource. So you get logins, groups, and roles, okay? So that's who can do something. And we're going to talk about logins because a login is at the server level and a user's at the database level unless you're doing contained database, okay? And if you're curious about that, look it up. Contained database is excellent, okay, for Azure SQL database because the actual login information moves with the database. So if we had to fail over or something like that, it'd automatically be there. A securable, okay, so we talked about principles. Securables, any object can be secured. So we got tables, views, start procedures, okay? And what you basically do is you grant, revoke, and deny privileges, okay? And whenever possible, use standard database server roles, okay, like data reader, data writer. So step 6, we're gonna actually go ahead and go back to what we just did and give it some access, okay? Any questions?
No, just fine.
Okay, cool. So at this point, what we're going to do is use master and we're going to drop a login, and this is the log I'm going to create, and it actually has that password. Okay, so execute, and there you go. So where did that go, right? Well, good question is that in here, when you do a login, logons show up here. So here's all my logons, and the hospital example I was telling you is there. And we created this guy called auto user. So here he is, okay? Now what we're gonna do is we can come to autos, okay? And if we look at autos, right, when we logged in right now with this guy, and in fact, why don't I try logging and we'll take a look. So it's auto user and this guy, right? So to get a login, it's very simple, right? Go here, and then what you do is you say, I don't want to use Windows, I want to use SQL authentication. Okay, and we're gonna put auto underscore user in here. I'm gonna put the password I had. Remember my password and hit connect, hopefully. It says, oh, login failed for auto user. So it says cannot open default database. And the default database, did I give it a database? I said database is autos, but I don't have access to autos yet. So that's not gonna work, right? So let's hit cancel. And now let's make a user for auto. So we're gonna say drop existing user, create a new user. Okay, now let's try this example again. Suddenly it's gonna work, okay? So that's just regular way. If you're a DBA, you're like, oh yeah, I know this. But I'm just doing it for completeness. So auto user again, and this time I put the password in, and hopefully if I did everything right, it's great. And now I can see all these, but guess what? I don't have access to it. Only person I have access to is, guess what? This database. And right now, there's no, if we hit refresh, and I have no access to tables. Why is that? Well, because by default, public only has access to DBO, and we don't have access to any of these schemas, okay? So let's go into, and we can see that because if we go back to this other guy, which has more access, guess what? We can see that he sees it. So that's great because now if I didn't give him access to active, and Jhon Minor is a system admin, he can see everything. But if I just gave him a login, he can see the database, but he can't see anything else in it yet. Now, one things I like doing is using database roles because it allows you to group a bunch of rights into a role, and that role you can assign to a group. Okay, so we can go ahead and say it exists from database principles. We're a role, then we're going to create this auto role. Okay, let's execute. Next thing we want to do is, here's the cool thing now. Remember I said is that if we had 100 tables and we had to grant access and we were doing it by user, we'd have to say grant access table 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to grant access now at the schema level. So I'm going to alter on schema, grant alter to the auto row. Then we're going to grant control, and we're going to grant select, and then we're going to add the user to this role. Okay, so we're going to execute this. And if you're curious, security would be here. And if we go to roles, we should see this new database role that came up, auto row, right? And if we go down to, I'm going to write one. Oh yeah, I'm an auto row user. So that's cool. And now if I go here and hit refresh, guess what? Those two tables came up, okay? So that's how security works. So next thing we want to do is we want to create a table, okay, to audit DML, data manipulation languages, insert, update, and delete, okay? So let's create this table here called log table changes. It has a bunch of defaults. So we want the date, we want default type of nothing, we want a username, an app name, and host name. Okay, so we want to track who's going to do this. Okay, that's basically what we're trying to do. So we're going to execute this, boom. And now we're going to make a trigger. So if the fluid data, we're going to say, okay, if I find it, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the data and I'm going to convert it into an XML object and place it in. Now, XML is awesome because not only keeps track of all the record information, but we can unparse it. And I suggest you look at the article I showed you at the beginning. And unparsing will allow us, okay, to go ahead and take an action, reverse it. So if we do insert, the opposite is to do a delete. If we do a delete, the opposite is to do an insert, right? So we can reverse the actions that were unwanted. Opposite of update is to take the prior data and update it again, right? If we hit refresh now, we're going to have a new table, right? Or did it create it? I thought I did. Hang on a second. So let's create a trigger, right? We did a table, alter table audit, right? Did I not create the audit table? Of course, I love it when something doesn't work. Oh yeah, guess what? Here's the thing. I even forget my demos, and again, I apologize, it's midnight here. This guy doesn't have access to the audit table. That's great, right? He's just a regular user. Super admin user, okay, has access to it, okay? So now if we hit, oops, wrong one. I wanted to hit refresh. And we hit tables, now we got our audit table here, right? Awesome. So now we have the audit table. Let's make some, we did the trigger. I'm going to double check to make sure I put the trigger on the table. So it should have been this table. And if we go to triggers, we got the fluid data trigger. And we can say, you can enable and disable. It's enabled. Awesome. And now we're going to test our action. So we're going to update one of the countries to the Czech Republic, where the ID is 8. Okay, so execute. We're going to remove all the data for the table. Going to execute. We're going to reload all the data for the table. Execute. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what happened. Okay, so now we've captured 3 messages in this table. Okay, the really cool thing about it is we can first see the first one was a update. So if we look at the update and we look at the record set, we can see the data that was there. So before it was Czech Republic, right? But now if we look at it, we spelled out the word Republic, it's not REP. What we also did is delete. Well, guess what? It was a delete from. So there was no where clause. And guess what? We have all 39 rows. So if we want to reverse it, we could, right? And the same thing is I ran this procedure and it does a bunch of inserts, okay? So the inserts, it was one batch, it has all the inserts. So right now we've proved that we're able to go ahead and audit any changes to this table, save it as XML, and this is great. Now the interesting thing is this trigger, even though I call it trigger fluid data, This could be reused in a table. The data, the actual code, okay, has really nothing to do with the table other than the fact that it's looking at the system tables. And the system tables, every time when you do a after trigger, and these are after triggers, these are not before triggers or instead of, right? The after triggers, you have two tables that you can look at. The inserted, okay? So if you have it, you do an insert, there's a table that gets made called inserted, and it's there into the after goes away and the trigger's done, right? So you can capture all the information. That's how we capture it. Same thing with the deleted. Now, does anyone know what an update is? Which tables do you think, and I'm going to ask one question because it's been kind of quiet and I can't see you guys. Does anyone know what happens when you do a update? Is everyone still there?
Yes, it's just removing the existing one and putting the new things in the
Exactly, exactly. So both of these tables are going to be used, right? So first we're going to do a delete and then an actual insert. So both of these tables are going to be done, and great answer whoever did that. So what I'm going to do is going to disable this trigger, okay, and then we're going to go back to the slide deck and see. So again, if you're, like I said, if you're a developer, a lot of this is just review. We'll talk about the reason why I like the XML over change data capture, and maybe you'll want to start using this. So high percent of you. The interesting thing is because it's trigger, we can have multiple tables point to the same audit table. And one thing I didn't show here, but you can add, is just a table name, right? It's really simple. What table you come from. And now guess what? We have a centralized audit table, okay? Audit table changes. So triggers can be used to audit inserts, updates, deletes. Use defined tables to keep track of the following: change type, change date, username, host name, object, so on. One table can be used for the whole database, just as a trigger for each one. So we did that. How about audit schemas, right? We don't want people to make changes to the database and without knowing. So database triggers can be placed to use audit and following events: triggers, functions, procedures, tables for use in security. A similar user-defined table can be created, and to include the T-SQL statement if we want. One table can be used for the whole database. So let's try that in steps 10 through 11 or 12. So if we go here, we're going to create this, and it's still going to be in the same database. Okay, so we're going to go here and do this, and something similar for recording defaults, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a database trigger. And you can look at the details, but we just don't have enough time to go into everything. If you're curious, there's a lot of different events you can do it. Where does a database trigger show up? Okay, that's going to come up to, and again, you'll have to bear with me, it's late. Programmability, database triggers. So we can see this triggers here. We could also go back to this other one. They don't do it anymore. No, I used to like an older SSMS was that, oh yeah, it did. It changes it to an X. So you know this is disabled. Awesome. And this one's enabled. So we can change it by saying, okay, object ID makes, not null. We're going to drop a makes table, and then we're going to create, you know, some constraints. We're going to say, hey, it can't be, you know, the maker of a type of can't be greater than 1903 because it's like the first car. Can't be less than, you know, the current date plus one. I'm going to put all these constraints on, and we're going to say if the table's there, drop it. If not, we're going to select top from here. So I see we're making a table. I guess we're not putting any data in this step. So let's just run this. And again, it's been a little while since I looked at this demo. So if we execute this, okay, so we have 6 different steps, and now we can execute this. We can take a look. Okay, so now we're trying to audit this again, but we can see first it was a drop table. Okay, Jhon minor, right? And we can see which one it was. So the first one was a create table, an alta table, an alta table, an alta table, and a drop table. And we can actually catch the SQL, T-SQL here. So if we're interested, we could replay these actions, just like kind of all the hologram scripts. So now we're going to disable this trigger, execute. Okay. How about if we want a table, say we had recipe table. Remember us talking, I worked for a company that was Texas Instruments, a division of it, and they made those little widgets for cars. What happened if that was really important? We never want anyone to change it unless, the DBA goes and disables the trigger and does an update, okay? How can we do that? Well, one thing we can do is we can create a trigger called static data. So if it's there, don't do it. If not, we're going to put this on the continent table, okay? Just for, again, I'm randomly just picking tables. It's not so much the data we're worried about as the concepts, right? If we want a table that's static, how do we do it? And one of the things is this one says, hey, if select from inserted and deleted, so it's inserts, then to say roll back the transaction and just give it a message and all these rollbacks, okay? So now we can say, hey, I want to do an insert, and guess what? It says inserts are not allowed. And let's delete a continent. Can't delete. Try to do an update. Can't do an update, okay? So that's one way to make a table static, okay? Other than just giving a security saying like data reader. Is there another way to do this? Okay. Well, one way to do it is we can go ahead on that table continent and actually create a view, okay, with check option. Okay. So we're going to say that the view continent ID has to be in one of these actual letters, A, B, C through G and F, right? So if we run this, it's going to remove the view, and now we have a view. So if we go to views, we can see this, and if we select this, right, we can see it. Same data we had, only it's a view now. Okay, so how does this help us, okay? One thing we can do is we can say insert into the view, okay? And at that point, we're going to try to put a value M. Well, M's not in this list, right? So what happens? Guess what? It says the check option basically stopped them from making a change. Oh, interesting, right? How about if we delete? Does anyone have a question?
Yeah, Jhon, I have a question about the triggers we are discussing.
Sure.
So the DB level triggers, is those storing the row level executions, like if in a specific table a row has been removed and updated. So that has been triggering the DB level triggers also?
No. So okay, so let's go back to it. So there's DDL versus DML. So DML means that data manipulation language, the inserts, updates, and deletes, right? Okay. Those will be tracked by, okay, the triggers at the table level, right? So it's this trigger right here called static data, right? I called this one static, but there was another one that said fluid, and which is on this one, which is actually going to the audit table. And that one will capture those. This one, which is the database level trigger, okay, we can do a lot of things. And this one, we actually only, let's go back to the definition. I know I went over it really quickly because we got a lot of stuff to go over. But if we go really slowly through this, we can see that I look for events and I say, as long as it's not a create state statistics event, and object's not like a system sync object, which I'm not doing a replication, then I'm just capturing it. So this will capture pretty much any type of database changes that we do. So like I did a create table, right? If we went ahead and, I have this disabled, right? So execute this, I'm gonna run this, and then let's go to that view, right? So now we just created this view. So I'm gonna drop it and recreate it, right? And let's see what happens. So we execute this. Now if we come back to this table, right, on the audits, and if I can find it, and which table is gone? It's not the log tables. I always forget where I put it. Let me go back to where the disable is. And it's this guy. And now if we execute this, we should see now that there is a it's because it's top 6. Always something, but hang on. Now, there's a reason why I had that in there. And if we execute this, we should see, it should have picked up create view, but there might be a reason why it's not. So again, take a look at it, but let's see, var type, event system name, type name, var type, event type, I will have to take a look at that, but there's
log database changes. We are storing the table level activity in this table triggers, and for row level activity. I mean, when we are inserting or deleting a specific row, that would be stored in our trigger for specific table, right? So those are separate.
Exactly. And the nice thing about this one, this is an XML because this is actually the data. We have the data that was changed, so we can go back and reverse it, okay? It doesn't help you for selects, right? You cannot do a trigger for selects. If you're curious about selects, you can turn on regular auditing, okay? But the problem with regular auditing is that regular auditing will only give you what happened, like the statement, like you did an update or a delete, but won't give you the records to reverse it. This will do that, though. That's the reason why we're doing this. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. You're welcome. And good question. And if you're curious, send me a note. I will tell you why the view didn't work. It's probably something simple. And that's at this time, my brain can't figure it out. So I'm going to disable this. So execute. Okay. And what we're going to do is, I think we're down to this example. So we showed we couldn't do this. We showed. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and updates will fail. So where continent equals B. So why is this going to fail? Let's look really quickly. Oh, yeah. It's this one, wrong place. So we said that if we go ahead and delete, this will work. And the reason why this works is because it's within scope of the check options, right? Because it's G is in here, right? If we go ahead and we say insert, the insert's going to work too, because guess what? G is valid. If we try to do an update and go out of range, right, it's going to fail, okay? So I'm going to drop the view, okay, and let's go back to the slide deck. So we talked about how we can audit the database, we can audit the table, right, and the database is any type of changes. We talked about preventing data changes. So table triggers can be used to prevent unwanted inserts, right? Check option in the view is a poor man's version of range integrity, right? So we can say, hey, within this range, don't get rid of anything. Both tables, though, unfortunately allow truncate. So how can we fix that? Again, the best way to do this is, hey, data read and data write, right? So let's try steps 15, 16. We talked about table truncation. So that's the next thing, okay? So to prevent table truncation, okay, we have the main table K that has the same key as the mission critical table. So this is our key table, T. Create a foreign key relationship, and guess what? Referential integrity will protect the data. Again, correct security is key, but this is kind of like, if you put the security in and then someone by mistake deletes it and you had to fix it once, you could also put this in and it'd be like a second level, okay? So how do we prevent the truncation? Because we can definitely, truncate things. So if we select star from here, we can see that there's 39 rows, right? And if we go and hit truncate, guess what? Even all those things we did before, they just go bye-bye, right? And so now we can go ahead and we can get a record count. So we can select star from here, 0 records, okay? So now we're going to load the data again. This time what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, let's create a schema called keys. Execute. And then what we're going to do in the schema, we're going to say, hey, select just the country ID into this schema from the active. And then we're going to do a foreign key constraint between the keys table and the active table, okay? Once that's placed, because there's a foreign key restraint, guess what? You cannot actually truncate data. So it's a poor man's way to stop people from truncating, okay? Again, the best way to do it is to not have it happen. I'm just going to alter the table and drop the constraint. Okay, so before we showed how to audit schema changes, how can we prevent them, okay? One way we can do is we can say we're going to stop drop table and alter table. So we're going to create a trigger for drop and alter, right? And then we're going to say, hey, if the object is in cars by country or continent, then this is a super duper protected table. We can't drop, okay? So we're going to do this. And let's run it. Execute. So now we have this trigger, right? It's another trigger, and we can look at it. It should be under programmability, database triggers, and we have this protect table trigger, okay? So now we go ahead and we try to drop it, and guess what? Super duper, it's protected. Just can't do it. And if we go ahead and we try to drop, oh, I should be able to do this. I want to drop keys by country, but I couldn't. Well, the problem is that we didn't put this where clause in to say what the schema was. So now if we go back and rebuild this, okay, and execute, and then we can clean up. Oh, that's funny. Okay, because I want to rebuild it, it doesn't allow me to rebuild it. So let's do this. Okay. Execute this. There's an object ready table. Why does it say in that? There is an object table protected. Trigger. Okay, I know that. Oh, because I didn't do this. That's why. Again, sorry, I'm a little tired. Try this again. So we just dropped it. Do this, and now we shouldn't be able to do this because it's not there. And then if we try to drop this, it should work because guess what? Now it's only active. We're not doing both. If we disable the trigger at this point, right, we can go on to the next sample. Okay, so we got it disabled. Audit successful login. So one of the things we might want to do is, hey, who's logging into our database? So one thing we can do is use MSDB because it's central. It's a system database. You can put stuff in it if you want to. And the second thing is we're going to create a table called audit log database logins. Okay, so we're going to drop it. I'm going to execute this. Okay, and so I must have did this before because the schema was there. Didn't have to do it, but I'll try to say this one, create the schema. We're gonna this time do this, execute here. Okay, and we're gonna say select star. Okay, so at this point, we created just a table. There's no trigger yet, right? If the table was there, then we're gonna system trigger. We're gonna get rid of it. System triggers are way down. Whoops, I'm gonna minimize this guy and go down here. Server objects. They're on the triggers way down here. And so we can see we have a couple of them, like, disallow users, disallow MS access. I don't know what this trigger is here. That might be a change date capture one. It's not something I created. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, create trigger server audits. We'll execute as SA for logon, begin. And we're going to insert into this table, okay? Execute. And now what we can do is we can go to this logon and hit disconnect. We can connect back to the database, right? Using the standard security of course, I didn't take the password in. Sorry about that. Let's auto use it, and it's hopefully is the password again. So Control C, database, and then we're going to go back here, SQL authentication, and then you put auto underscore user, and then we're going to tab it in here, and now we're going to connect. Okay. And now if we go ahead and we go to MSDB, which is a system database, because it could have been any days, we just want to track it, right? And then tables, we can see is a logon. And if we select here, we can see now, wow, there was a lot of stuff logged in. So it's interesting is that, because you do stuff with Explorer, there's a lot of connections. And we can see that auto user just logged in and there's a ton of connections. Okay, so we can definitely audit the connections, and then basically we're going to disable the trigger. Okay, and again, if you look at this one says audit for logon, so we do just a logon trigger. Okay, now we can also do with logon triggers. We can do the following. I'm not going to go over it because I just don't have time. But we can go ahead and say disallow users, right? And the disallow users says if the login's not a certain person and the times in certain hours don't allow people onto the system, it just rolls back the logon. The problem with that is it's very dangerous, okay? Be really careful. If you don't have this set up right and suddenly nothing matches, guess what? Everyone's locked out for this time period. Nothing you can also do, same idea, is we can do a logon trigger, but we can look for the application. So for instance, a lot of times in the past, MS Access was a hog with clogging up stuff, like people were doing stuff like maybe a cross product on the table. It's a crazy query. I didn't want to put resource governor. We just want to give her all the MS Access Office products. This one will go ahead and look at the application. If you're connecting to the database with the Office product, it just doesn't allow you. Okay. So let's talk about change data capture. It came, it was new in 2008. It came out in, and we'll talk about that pretty soon. So I got about 15 minutes, if that. So we talked about prevent table truncation. Okay. Prevent schema changes, right? So we talked about basically you can go ahead and after the schema change is done, you can just roll it back. Now, just be careful with this because some people can take this to the extremes, right? We can theoretically create a server trigger that says, hey, if drop database, then rollback, right? It will work. Problem is, if you got a 2 terabyte database, it's going to flush everything out, and then it's going to reload everything. It's going to be a nightmare for your servers, right? So just be careful on what you do. Put the rollback on, okay? We talked about audit server logins, right? Logins can be used to audit successful attempts, just like table and database. A login table can be used to track it. I put it in MSDB. It's not as mission critical as master, okay? Prevent server logins, we talked about this. You can give it a look at the connection string. It's almost just like a resource governor. You could look at groups. It's within a certain group during a certain time period. Let them in. If not, don't let them in. So this can block like users maybe accessing the system during hours you don't want. It only works for new logins, right? So if someone had a existing logon that just keeps on querying the database, well, it's still going to be logged on to it, disconnects or because of a timeout, or they just close it, right? So that's not going to prevent that from happening. And also I've done it with looking at the application name, so any Office products. So let's talk about change data capture. How does this work? Okay, there's a new feature that came out in 2008. Okay, and what's going to happen is this: it's asynchronous from the transaction log. So instead of the triggers that happen right away, it's asynchronous. So we have this source table. This change happens. It goes to the log. Right? We have a job that picks up the log and does the change data capture and fills up the change tables. Okay. SSIS was built back in the day to use these change data capture to do stuff. You could do like slowly changing dimensions, type 2, you know, so you could say, hey, effective date 1 row, put a new row in, okay? You're going to see though that when we make a change, it takes a while, okay? And what it does, it uses SQL jobs to capture data and views and functions to pull in the data, okay? So how do we do this? First, we want to enable at the database, which creates a bunch of CD star system tables. Okay, so the following agents are made to scoop up the data. Okay, so we get the capture and cleanup. Then we can also enable it at the table level, which creates another set of CDC table name is CD track data. Okay, and it will track both DML changes on the table as well as DDLs. Okay, so let's look at step 23. So first thing we want to do is we want to say, okay, use the correct database, and we're just going to do some cleanup. So we're going to get rid of our triggers that we played with. Boom. We're going to drop some things like the keys and the 2 audit tables. You don't need those. We're because it doesn't exist, or you don't have permission, so it probably doesn't exist. Then we're gonna. Am I the right guy in here? Let's just double check. Could be the wrong user. Nope, it's auto. So J minus I should be just exist. Then we're gonna delete these guys. Invalid name. So we're gonna delete these. Hopefully, execute. Okay, so now if we go here, why does it give me stuff and hit refresh? Okay, and then okay. So let me look at this really quickly. Authorizations. Okay, active cross by country. What happened to this? Refresh. Okay, just bear with me. So these are database triggers. I'm just going to clean these up while I'm looking at it. I might have just did too much. Let's see if these are gone. So those are gone. Okay, we got continent here, but it says USP, load continent, USP, load cross by country. Problem is that I just get rid of one table I didn't want to get rid of. So we got continent here, but we don't got the countries. Right. Let me double check it one more time. Cross by country, continent. Let's just fill that again and made one little mistake. So we're going to go back to continents here, and then we have something called cross by country. So here we go. So apologize for that. We're going to just create this table really quickly, and that's it. Execute. Boom. Done. Now we're back to where the demo needed to be. Boom. Now we got the two tables. Okay. Knew I was missing something. So let's do what we need to do. So first thing we need to do is this. We go and we is change data capture enabled. So go to master, and in master sys database, we can look for something called is enabled, right? And we can see that autos is not enabled. Okay. How do we do that? First thing we want to do is authorize the database, make sure it's SA, that's standard. Use autos, right? Boom. And we just hit enable it. That's it. Simple. So now if we come back here and we look at it, we should see this as enabled, which is 1. Awesome. Okay, so we're doing pretty good now. So next thing we want to do is use this, and we just want to see which tables. Okay, there's a table called from sys schemas. We can see the schema name and table name, which one's being tracked. Okay, because we do use schemas here, and we can see nothing's being tracked. But look, when we automatically enable this, a bunch of system tables actually happened. Changed tables, DDL history, LSN, capture columns, and index. Okay, so to make sure the agent's running, so the first thing we have to do is I'm going to disconnect from this guy because I don't need this guy anymore. And what we need to do is for this to work, remember we talked about the SQL agent has to be running. And so SQL agents run. Awesome. So now what we want to do is we want to execute this. Boom. Okay, and this is going to enable change data capture on the cars by country table. This will do it on the continent. Okay, so now see, you can see it actually started 2 jobs. Okay, jobs are gone. So now what we're going to do is we're going to execute, and before we didn't load any data. So let's execute the data. Okay, boom. Did I not do something? Maybe because I did not. Okay. Maybe because continent I didn't drop it and rebuild it. So that's the reason why. Okay. So now if we go ahead and look at continent, is there any tracking? No, it didn't pick up anything. But the cars by country should have picked it up, right? And it did. See? So we can see right now those 39 rows there. So for us to do this, we can just do a truncate table, right? And then we can put in one that didn't work by mistake was this guy right here. So active dot continent. So change this here, go here, and now we execute. Boom. And so, okay, so because is this, we cannot do truncates. That's nothing. Truncates can also be predicted from this by putting CDC on it and replication also. So boom, delete drop. Actually, I want to delete. And again, you can tell I'm tired. So execute. Please include reference screen. Okay. So now there's a reference constraint. Okay, so I'm just going to skip this part, but if you did not have the reference constraint there, which I did by mistake add, we'd be able to see it. Now let's update it. So we're going to update. Now let's update it. Is there a question? I'm running like 7 minutes left, and let's see if I can finish this up. So 1 row's here is an update. Here's another update. Say, hey, no residents live here. And then let's look, see if the updates work. So if we go to updates, we can see now that we have different operations. So we can see a 3, okay, as an update is a delete, and a 4 is an insert. There's our update, okay? Awesome, kind of cool. If we do the same thing for continent, let's see if it picked it up. We can see that we had a 3, which is Antarctica, no residents live here, right? So now we can run these 2, try execute. And now we can go ahead and do the same thing. So if we select from here, what happened, we can see that this one said delete from country, which G. So we had a 1, which is a delete. And then if we go here, and again, you'll just have to look up the numbers, but you'll figure them out really quickly. So 1, 2, and we have the data we deleted. Okay, so let's alter the table. Okay, we're going to add a personal percentage as some type of persisted column. Okay, so execute. Okay, let's look at the DDL history. Execute. Okay, well, now it picked up the execute. That's awesome, right? And we can alter this active countries table. We're going to add another one, char equal yes. And then we can look at it. We'll pick up another alter, and it did. Awesome. If we do a truncate, okay, cannot truncate because it's published. Okay, alter, drop constraint. Okay, and then we can drop the table. Try dropping the table, and guess what? We can't. Okay. So disabling it. How do you disable it? You can disable it by doing this, right? Execute. Now, if we execute this, okay, what happened to the tables that were for change data capture? That is one of the reasons why I don't like change data capture. Once you get rid of it, it gets rid of the tables, right? So if we go ahead and we disable this, right, remove tracking from the tables, and here, okay, and we go back, you're going to see that this actually went away. So this last one is disabled it, and we're back to end of demo. So let me get out of here and let me present the wrap-up slide, and I'm going to share one more time, and then I'll take any quick questions we have, and hopefully you learned something. Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just excellent presentation. Just I have a one question about any performance issue when we use the CDC.
Can you say it again really slowly, please?
Any performance is related with when we use the CDC?
Nope.
Change data capture. When we use the change data capture, is there any performance decrease or not?
No, the only performance decrease is, just remember, you have to run a trigger, right? So if you do an insert and you're doing the other way, which is doing to the XML, it is going to take some time, right? You don't want to be crazy about it, right? Because if you log everything, it captures it. So if you build, you can do an insert when you never do a commit, and then you insert a million rows, it's going to try to do an XML of a million. It's probably not going to work. So again, be careful with the XML type of the triggers. As for this one uses a log reader, so it's a little better when it comes out. Like if you did a million rows, it eventually goes log, eventually captures and putting it in a table. So that's where the only performance is. Again, I would suggest testing it, okay? So that's the best way. This is the interesting thing is, if you're curious, these are the tables. I'll let you go over it. Nice thing about the comments on CDC, nice try. For things that you're missing, which I put in mine, is user and host name are really nice, right? Alter table does not add a new column to change data capture list, which is not good. Did not find a stored procedure to allow for additions to the capture list. Disabling removes the table, which is not good. And sometimes the timing depends. Like back in the day, an earlier version, it took a while for something to show up. Might have been just speed. Nowadays, 2019 seems pretty quick, right? And that's about it. So that's a wrap up. Is there any other questions?
Nothing from my side, but fantastic session, Miner. So
You're
happy.
welcome. You're welcome. And hopefully you learned something, and it's all good. Just try to pick the hammer that, will hit the right nail, right? So if you got a screwdriver, use the screwdriver. So maybe change data capture will work for you. If you have something that's small and this works, then try it out.
Yeah, Jhon, I have just another question.
Sure.
In the SQL Server, there is a option for the server audit events. So what are the basically the difference if I use the server audit events rather than the change data control mechanism?
Are you talking about time-based time series tables?
No, I'm talking about the in SQL Server there are many audit event. Built-in audit event. We can set the audit event. What is going on the change and what is changing. So there is another mechanism in change data control. So I just are trying to understand what is the difference between the audit event, setting up the auditing event, and the change data control mechanism.
Okay, so here's the thing, with the audit table, it's based on triggers, and what happens, it happens right away, right? And so as long as your server's not extremely busy and you're not doing a million inserts, it's going to work pretty good. Okay. The one thing that's nice about the change data capture is that it does it after the fact, so it goes and doesn't put as much as performance hit, but eventually it does kick off, reads the log, and then pushes it into those tables you can look at. The problem is the following too on the last slide, and that's the caution. Okay, if you make a change to the schema, okay, that table, okay, doesn't start tracking that new columns I added. Okay, I didn't show it because we didn't have enough time, but that's something for you to look at. Okay, for the one that I showed you, which just catches the XML, guess what? That would automatically go into the XML. It doesn't worry about, what the schema changes, okay? Second thing is when you go ahead and you disable, okay, change data capture, those tables just go away. If you do an audit and you disable a trigger, guess what? You still have the table. So now you know the differences between the two. You're just going to have to figure out which one's best for you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I
Okay,
have
I
a-
don't want to
Yeah,
take
but
away
it
from
was
the
an
next.
excellent session. Yeah, but yeah, I am very much enjoyed, and this was an excellent session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any last questions? And then I don't want to run into the next speaker's time. Okay. With that said, peace. Have a great night and see you next time. Okay.
Jhon, before ending, could you
Yeah.
please give us some link where we can contact you for if you have any further questions? The social
Sure.
contact.
You can reach me on LinkedIn. Just look for Jhon Miner on LinkedIn Insight, and you can definitely ping me there. Also, you can just send an email. Again, I might not see it. If you send it a couple times, I'll eventually find it. I get a ton of emails to john.at craftydba.com. Last thing is, if you go up top, you can see the two things for the GitHub and for my articles. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.